Can we edit this out, by the way? And David and Clyde, thank you. So we've looked at three, and today we're going to look at another one of the judges. A man with big muscles, or at least a man with a lot of power from God, by the name of Samson. But he had just as big of character flaws. And you're looking at his story, one will be warned, but I think we'll remember how great and glorious God is. So, let's dive right into it. When you look at the book of Judges, background, a little bit of review. The book of Judges. So if you go back to like the book of Exodus, you have God delivering Israel out of slavery from Egypt, right? And part of that promise that he gives them the promise of the promised land. That he says, listen, you're going to go into the promised land. I'm giving you this land of Canaan. And he gives them his law. Remember the whole 10 Commandments, right? Charlton Heston walks up the mountain and gives the tablets, or maybe it wasn't quite like that. But Moses goes to the mountain. God gives them the 10 Commandments, gives them the law of how they should live. They've been a nation that has been in slavery for generations and hundreds of years. So God says, listen, I'm going to tell you how you are to live. What you as a people, as my people, should be like. And the purpose of that was twofold, primarily, I believe. One was that they would live lives that honored God. Live lives that were reflected what God intended when he created mankind. I don't know, things like loving each other and helping each other and not killing each other, the little things like that, right? And so and then there's these regulations, and within that system, within that law, is a system for sinful man to have a relationship with God through sacrifice. And then there's this part about being unclean and clean. If you did certain things in the Old Testament, or if you touched things, or if you ate certain things, you were unclean. And what that had more to do with was being in a state of, it identified kind of like your state of relationship with God in a sense. So as a good and holy and honorable and worthy of all our worship God, and here's sinful man, if we have stuff in our lives that didn't reflect that didn't honor that, God says you got to take care of that. You'd be said to be in a state that is unclean, if you will. And so there was a process to restore that relationship, right? So remember, there's always a process for forgiveness. There's always a process for restoration. That's God's grace and his mercy towards us. This is all in the book of Exodus. Someday I'll get to Judges and Samson, but we'll get there eventually. So here's Exodus, right? So he delivers them up, gives them the law, gives them and his presence and all this awesome stuff. And then they go wandering in the desert because they forget and they don't choose to trust God. And that's the book of Numbers. And then the book of Numbers ends, and they're looking across to the promised land, the land that God had promised Israel. And you have the book of Joshua, right? Some of you grew up, Joshua fought the battle of. Yeah. This is all I'm going to dance. This is it. No tap dancing today. And so you have the story of Israel having tremendous victories, these supernatural, awesome, God-honoring victories that are just, man, God, you're good. Through the land of Jericho, and God is giving them the land. But God said, I want you to drive out all the people in the land. And why did he want that? Why did he tell the Israelites, listen, go in and drive out anybody in the land? Because God didn't love those people? No, that's not it. Forgiveness was offered to those people as well at any time that they've chosen. This was an act of righteous judgment, but it was also an act of protection. God knew that if Israel started to live with and to intermingle and to intermarry and all this stuff with the Canaanites and with the Philistines and with the Ammonites and Amorites and all these people, that they would begin to take on what they believed. They would begin to assimilate what they believed into their beliefs. So rather than worshiping the one true God, they would start worshiping false gods and all the deplorable, and I mean deplorable, religious practices that these faiths and religions had. It was horrible, right? So listen, he says, I want to protect you, drive them out. Do not, they can come to you and they can, they can see the one true God, and that's great. But as far as you're concerned, this is it. That make sense? This is all background, and I promise this is important to Judges. So Joshua, in the book of Joshua, they go in, they do all these victories, but they don't finish the job. And what happens? Lo and behold, the Israelites, they start hanging out with, they start, hey, you know what? I like your temple there. Oh, I like your God. I think I'm going to go worship that God. Hey, your daughter's kind of cute. I know God said I shouldn't marry her, but I'm going to do it anyways. I think she's cute, right? And so this happens. And what you have is this nation that was to be an example, a beacon, a bastion that pointed people to one true God, because they were different, because they had different morals, because they had different values, because they had a life that was to honor God and His wishes above all else. They would point people and point the other nations to God. But because they were ignoring that and forgetting their God, and just started living their lives they wanted, it will look like fun and all these other faiths and religions. Okay? Do you get the point? So this is happening in Israel. This is where the book of Judges begins. So when you read the first 2 chapters of Judges, and man, you got to read this book. It is a really good book. First 2 chapters of Judges gives like a prologue, a preview of what the rest of the book is going to be like. Right? It lays out this pattern. Remember, we talked about this with Gideon. And it lays out this pattern that Israel, with this cycle that Israel would follow. The first step of the cycle was that, and you can read it when you read the different judges in the accounts, it says, now Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Okay? So they're choosing to run away from God. They're choosing to ignore. They're forgetting their God and living their lives different than what He intended. Right? So the first part of the cycle is Israel does evil in the eyes of the Lord. So God in His righteous and merciful and gracious judgment brings a foreign nation to come in to oppress them. And the point of that oppression was to bring their attention back to Him, right? So they do evil in the eyes of the Lord, and they sin, and God raises up a foreign nation, like the Philistines, for example, and they would oppress the Israelites. And the oppression would be long, and the oppression would be hard. And the point of the oppression was God saying, hey, Israel, remember me? I told you this would happen. You're going to trust me? You're going to follow me? You're going to remember me? And so the oppression would be long enough, and sure enough, what would they do? They would cry out to God. They say, God, I'm sorry. So they would remember their God, and they'd cry out to Him, and what would God do out of His mercy and out of His love? He'd raise up a deliverer. He'd raise up a judge. We looked at Gideon, and Gideon was one of them, right? And He'd raise up a judge, and this judge would defeat the oppressors, defeat the, whatever nation was oppressing them. And He would defeat them and deliver them, and then they would live in peace. Okay? That's good. For a while. That's the problem. When you read the stories, you're like, what? God just saved you from the field. You saw you saw Gideon defeat, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of people with just 300, and all they had was lamps and a few clay pots. And yet, a few years later, they start running after other gods. They start doing everything that they should. And the cycle repeats, right? So the book of Judges, real quick, is this, when you read it, it's this downward spiral. It's very intentional in how it's written and what it's saying. It's this downward spiral of the nation of Israel as it starts out, maybe okay, kind of, but it just descends into complete failure to following God. So the first 3 judges, so you get the first 2 chapters, and then the subsequent chapters are the accounts of these other judges. First 3, hey, they're pretty good judges. And then you have Gideon, and Gideon starts out really good, remember, right? This huge victory, and he's obeying God, he's trusting God, and things are good. But then at the end, he's literally crafting a false god and saying, hey, we got to worship this. And it's like, wait, what happened, Gideon? And then you have Jephthah, right? And he just keeps descending down, and so he's like this. He doesn't even remember. He doesn't even know God well enough to know how to follow Him. And then the last judge in the book of Judges that's recorded is this guy named Samson. And Samson, truth be told, I'm not sure why we exactly teach him in Sunday school, because the guy is deplorable. And that's where we start. So, and by the way, the life of Samson is a great picture of Israel as a whole. Let me see if we can make this clear. So turn with me to Judges chapter 13. Judges chapter 13. What I want to bring out on the first few verses in Judges chapter 13, verses 1 through whatever. Does somebody have a Bible from the pew? Can somebody tell me what page number that's on, if you think of it? Just look up Judges chapter 13. We'll have it on the screens, but obviously you have your Bibles, and if you need one, there's one in your pew. I encourage you to open it. Judges chapter 13 starts out with this. Now again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. See that cycle starting? Again, Israel did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. 40 years of oppression. Okay?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
175.
175? Thank you. So page 175 in the Bible here on the pew. Verse 2 of chapter 13. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you don't drink wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart to God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." Okay. Who is this Samson guy? This Samson guy? He knows, she knows, the family knows. Here's God said, listen, you have been unable to have children. Now I'm going to have it so you can have children. And this child that you're going to have is not just going to be another run-of-the-mill boy. No. This child I am going to use to begin to deliver Israel from the oppressors that you have been so longing for. Right? So, think about what Samson heard growing up. Samson, God's going to use you. I mean, think about his parents. Like, holy cow, this is awesome. Not only do they get to have a child, they've got this child that, man, he's going to be set apart. Samson, my point is this, Samson has everything going for him, doesn't he? Right? He is chosen by God to begin to deliver the Israel. I mean, this is incredible. This is incredible promise. This is incredible potential. This is awesome. I don't know, kind of like Israel, chosen by God to do incredible things. So what does Samson do with this incredible potential? What does Samson do with this incredible promise that has been placed on his life? Yeah. But we need some background. Remember that it says, see to it, the boy is to be a Nazarite. Okay, so you read it in Exodus and I believe Deuteronomy, there's regulations for what it meant to take a Nazarite vow. So on top of just the regular regulations that God placed on people as far as, don't eat these certain animals and don't do this stuff and don't, because I don't want you to, just trust me on the reasons, so just don't do it. On top of that, if you were to take a Nazarite vow, it was a vow that you take usually for a short season for a specific purpose. And it meant you didn't do primarily three things. First thing you didn't do is you didn't drink alcohol. You didn't drink the wine. It's just, you didn't. You said, listen, I'm taking it a step further. As a sign of what God is doing in my life and what he wants me to do as far as this position, don't drink alcohol. And also God's word says, listen, don't drink alcohol, and then secondly, don't touch dead animals. Don't touch a carcass. Don't touch anything dead or unclean, right? So we got those two. And the third one, don't cut your hair. All right? It's all very foreign to us. We don't have something similar to this. But these were the regulations that God placed for a Nazarite vow. And this is consistent what he says. Don't cut his hair. Right? So does this make sense? This is the background. So Samson is born. The promise begins. Dun, dun, dun. God honors what he said, does exactly what he said he's going to do. And then he turned to chapter 14, and Samson is older, and it starts out with chapter 14, verse 1. It says this. Now Samson went down to Timnah, and he saw a young Philistine woman there. Wait. Who's oppressing Israel? Okay, we got that. By the way, who should a good Israel boy marry? A fellow Israelite. Okay. Again, not because God didn't love the other nations. God wants to bless the other nations, but he just knows how this works. He's like, well, okay, we got this. Now when he returned, he saw this young Philistine woman. When he returned, he said to his father and mother, I have seen a Philistine woman in Timnah. Now go get her for me as my wife. What? Oh. Huh? Samson, what are you talking? What? Who? His father and mother replied, isn't there an acceptable woman among your relatives or among our people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines to get a wife? And Samson, in all his wisdom, says, oh yeah, you're right, Dad. You know what? I'm going to honor you because the Bible says I should honor my parents. I'm going to honor you. I'm going to listen to you. Okay, you're right. Is that what he does? This guy. Man, if he sees something and he likes it, he doesn't care. He doesn't care what God says. He doesn't care what God wants. He's like, oh, just forgets completely about God. He says, but Samson said to his father, get her for me. She is the right one for me. That's what parents do. We read the story on, and this does not end well for Samson. There's a tragic story here. It's really kind of sad. Where she tricks him, and bad things happen, and then she ends up marrying like his friend. So the marriage was basically annulled, and all kinds of, it's a soap opera right here. Well, that makes sense, right? But I digress. So, but then following on, and he gives them this riddle. Oh, I gotta back up. This is fun stuff. Now, verse 5, he says, get her for me. And Samson went, in verse 5, down to Timnah together with his father and his mother. And as they approached the vineyards in Timnah, suddenly a young lion came roaring towards them. Now the Spirit of the Lord came upon him in power, so that he tore the lion apart with his bare hands, as he might have torn a young goat. But neither told his father nor mother what he had done. And then he went down and talked to this woman, and he liked her. Now, sometime later, when he went back to marry her, he turned aside and looked at the lion's carcass. In it was a swarm of bees with some honey, which he scooped out with his hands and ate it as he went along. Now, when he rejoined his parents, he gave them some, and they too ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the lion's carcass. Do you see the character of Samson here? He says, listen, I want this woman. I don't care if it's right or wrong. I'm good. And he's like, okay. And on the way, he rips the lion apart. Okay, maybe that's self-defense. But did he go through the process of becoming clean again after he rips it apart? No, he doesn't care. He doesn't even tell his folks about it. So then he coming back down the path. He says, oh, there's that carcass. I remember when I ripped that thing apart. That's right, I'm the man. And he looks, and there's a swarm of bees in there, and there's some honey. And so what does he do? The guy who's not supposed to touch a dead carcass? I would bend down and act it out, but that's not going to go well. Let's say the lion's about this high. He scoops it out, and he eats it. Do you see? I mean, he doesn't care. He could care less about the calling that God has on his life. He could care less about the God he's called to follow. And he's scooping it out, and he's eating it. And not only that, he says, hey, I'm going to share it with my folks. So what he's doing is he's taking his sin and literally sharing it with his parents. And there's the point here. Our sin that we think is so secret, our sin that we think is just about us, no. It always affects those around us. Always. Right? And here, do you see this downward spiral of Samson? I mean, he's just beelining it down to, I don't care about God. He's forgetting his God. He's selfish, he's impatient, he's arrogant. I mean, he's riddled. I'm a smart guy. Nobody can stop me. Our sin always affects others. Chapter 14. Jump down. Oh, by the way, this is when the Spirit of the Lord comes upon Samson, it's incredible. Right now, it's not just the lion. So you got the story when you read the rest of chapter 14. His future wife betrays him, and he loses this riddle because she betrays him, and then he's got to pay a bunch of money, so he goes off, he's got to give like a bunch of cloaks, and so he doesn't have the money for the cloaks, so what does he do? He goes and kills 300 people who have cloaks to take their cloaks to go pay off his debt. Wow, okay. So then he does that, and then the Philistines come, and they're all mad, like, what do we do? So then he ties these foxes together with some brush, and he lights the brush on fire, and he just throws them into the fields of the Philistines, and it just decimated the Philistine crops. So by the way, all of this is God's delivering them, right? These are decisive victories against the Philistines, right? But he's doing this, and so then the Philistines come down. You can read this in the rest of chapter 15. In chapter 15, it starts out, the Philistines come down to get revenge of Samson for destroying all their crops. And Samson picks up, do you remember this? He picks up a jawbone of a donkey. And he kills 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey. Because the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Now I need to clarify something here. When it says the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson, and he does all these incredible, feats of strength and power and defeating the Philistines, God is not condoning Samson's character. Right? Because Samson is victory, it's not saying, oh, God's saying Samson's a good guy. No. It is God using a broken, sinful man to accomplish his will because he's that big and powerful. He says, listen, I made a promise to Israel. I made a promise to mankind that I'm going to do this. I'm going to pull this story along. I'm going to pull this nation of Israel, which just chooses to disobey me over and over and over and over and over again. And I'm going to use what I have, a.k.a. this deplorable man named Samson, to accomplish my will. But it doesn't mean that he condones Samson's actions or his character. Does that make sense? Is that fair? So then, he has this incredible victory, kills 1,000 people with the jawbone of a donkey, and this is part of God delivering Israel from the oppression of the Philistines through a very broken man, a very arrogant, selfish man. Now, chapter 16. By the way, he gives this great victory in chapter 15, verses 18. Just listen here. It says, because after this victory, Samson was thirsty. Because he was very thirsty, he cried out to the Lord, you have given your servant a great victory, but must now I die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? Check out this attitude. Right? God, you gave me a great victory, but now I'm going to die because I'm thirsty. Oh, I don't know. Chapter 16. This is the story most of us would remember or know, right? Samson and Delilah. So remember the story with me? Samson sees, first of all, chapter 16, verse 1. It says, one day Samson went to Gaza, where he saw a prostitute. He went in to spend the night with her. Okay, do you see the character here? He goes in, they try and trick him, and then sometime later, verse 4, he falls in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Now the rulers of the Philistines went to her and said, see if you can lure him into showing you the secret of his great strength, and how we can overpower him so we may tie him up and subdue him. This guy's killing us out there, right? And we got to take it. Delilah, listen, he seems to like you. I want you to trick him, find out where the source of his strength is, and then we can subdue him. Now, each one of us will give you 1,100 shekels of silver. Whoa, payday. So she's like, I'm in. Not a problem. I don't even like this Samson guy. He's an arrogant jerk. But, for that much money, I'm in. So Delilah said to Samson, tell me the secret of your great strength and how you can be tied up and subdued. She's not subtle, by the way. Right? I'm just going to come right. Man, I got like a lot of money on this. Hey, tell me. So Samson lies to her. And he gives her this, if you do X, Y, and Z, if you know, I'll be weak as, not a problem. And so they do it. And the rulers of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh thongs that had not been dried, and she tied them up. She tied him up with them, tied him with them. When the men hid in the room, and she called out to Samson, the Philistines are upon you! But he snapped at things as though there were nothing, because he lied, he still had all his strength. Now a second time, this is just a bizarre story to me. Then Delilah said to Samson, you have made a fool of me, you lied to me, come now tell me how you can be tied. Again, not subtle. And so he gives her another story. By the way, I see the arrogance in here. I know what you're doing. I got this under control. Not a problem. Tells a story. And of course, he snaps the ropes, these new ropes that were supposed to tie him, but they didn't work. And Delilah then said to Samson in verse 13, until now you've been making a fool of me and lying to me. Tell me how you can be tied. He replied, if you weave 7 braids on my head and the fabric on the loom and tighten it with the pin and then blah, 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 blah. And again she called to him, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. He awoke from sleep and pulled the pin and the loom and with the fabric. She said to him, how can you say I love you when you won't confide in me? This is the 3rd time you've made a fool of me and haven't told me the secret of your great strength. Now, if you're Samson, and the woman whom you love has 3 times tried to, bring you down, see Samson here? Not the sharpest knife in the drawer. With such nagging, you read that, right? Hell hath no fury that a woman scorned, or there's something about, like verbal waterboarding here, however you want to put it. With such nagging, she prodded him day after day until he was tired to death. By the way, all Samson had to do was what? Leave! Nope, he's there. Okay. So he told her everything. No razor should come on my head. For surely as they cut my hair, my strength is coming. When Delilah, verse 18, saw that he had told her everything, she went to the rulers and told them, and sure enough they do it. She cuts her hair. Then she called out, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he woke up from his sleep and thought, I'll go out as before and shake myself free. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. The Lord left Samson because Samson left the Lord. Samson mocked God. The sad part is, the tragic part is, Samson didn't even know that the Lord had left him. Do you see the tragedy in that? Here is this man who the presence of God, the power of God, the Spirit of God would come on him and he would have tremendous victory. He knew what that felt like. He knew what that was. And he just continually forgot about his God, forgot about his God. I don't care about you, God. I don't care. So when God left, he didn't even know it. And so the Philistines seized him. They gouged out his eyes and took him down to Gaza. Binding him with bronze shackles, they set him to grinding in prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. So, do you see the tragedy in this? Here's the deliverer, the great hope for Israel, and they just watched him be subdued. He's down in the prison. He's grinding a big grinding mill. I mean, but God is gracious. God is kind. God will pull his redemptive story. God will bring his saving story for mankind to fruition. He'll drag it through. He doesn't care. And here's what happens. Samson is down in prison. And they call them up and they say, they have all these leaders come together and thousands of people in this place and say, hey, bring that Samson guy up here. Maybe he'll entertain us, right? Here's this blind Samson that they're just probably going to mock. I don't know what it meant. And so they bring him up. And Samson says something. He cries out to God. By the way, when they brought Samson up in verse 24 of 16, it says, our God, they say, has delivered our enemy into our hands, the one who laid waste our land and multiplied their sin. They were giving their false gods honor for the slaying, for the subduing of Samson. And while they were in high spirits, they shouted, bring up Samson and entertain us. And when they stood him among the pillars, Samson said to the servant who held him, put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I may lean on them. Now the temple was crowded. Jump down to verse 28. Then Samson prayed to the Lord. See, Samson's remembering his God, isn't he? Mm-hmm. He prays to the Lord, remember me, O God. Please strengthen me just once more, and let me with one blow get revenge on the Philistines for my 2 eyes. Samson reached toward the 2 central pillars in which the temple stood, embracing himself against them, with his right hand on one, and his left hand on the other. Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And then he pushed with all his might, and down came the temple on the rulers and people in it. Thus he killed many more when he died than when he lived. See, Samson remembers his God, and God can use him again. Does that make sense? I mean, do you see it? And all of this is, if you're like an Israelite reading this maybe 20 years after it's written, you're like, oh, wait. Yeah, God saved us from the Philistines. But here's the point. We'll wrap it up with this. Samson forgot his God. But he confesses to God. He comes back to God. And God says, okay. There were consequences. But the book of Judges shows the results of Israel forgetting their God. And by the way, when you read the rest of the book of Judges, it is horrible. I mean, Israel's depravity, Israel's spiral down into complete moral, is like atrocious. And you read Judges and you're like, there's no hope. We just keep failing and failing and failing. And the results of that forgetting their God, it wasn't just Samson, it was, like all of them, like nationwide, boom. There's no hope. What do we do? God. But we turn to the very last verse, because this is where the hope is. He says, in those days, the very last verse of the book of Judges, 21 verse 25. In those days, Israel had no king. And everyone did as he saw fit. The hope of Judges is in that word, king. Because when you read, by the way, if you look to the next page, it's the book of Ruth. And when you get home today, read the story of Samson, and then read the story of Ruth. And you got Samson, this Israelite boy who had all the promises, everything all set up, everything was good for him, it should have been great, who lives this deplorable life and just fails and fails and fails. And then you contrast that with the book of Ruth. I think it's by purpose that they're right next to each other. You have the story of Ruth, who here's this foreign woman who shouldn't honor God, who shouldn't, but yet here she lives a more righteous life and honors God more than Samson. But anyways, I digress. But after the book of Ruth is what? The book of Samuel. The book of Samuel is the story of Israel getting the king that they want, the king that God is going to use to finally, one, deliver them from the Philistine oppression, a.k.a. King David. I don't know, things like killing the Philistine giant. Samson started the deliverance, and the King David is going to complete it. And that king, that line of that king of Israel, goes all the way to Christ. The king of Israel, the one final ultimate king that's promised here in this Old Testament, is fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ, that when he died and he rose from the dead, that's the saving, that's the freedom from the oppression that we all seek and need from from our downward spiral. Right? That's the hope of Judges. The hope of Judges is Christ through the King of Israel. So let's bring this to application. See, we too, like Samson, we can forget God, don't we? Maybe not like Samson did. But see, we can see a storm and we can forget our God. We can see a hurricane coming. Maybe I can see a hurricane coming because this is my first one. I can see a hurricane coming and I can forget about my God. And forget about where he says, in 1 Peter says, to cast all my fears on him. Why should I cast my concerns and my fears on him? Because he's God. Or I can, and this is where it really gets tricky, and maybe I shouldn't share all this. My back can go out when I'm looking at a hurricane that I've never really experienced, and there's lots of things I want to do, and there's lots of things I want to do maybe after the hurricane or during the hurricane, but I'm like laying flat and can't move. See, I can forget my God. And I can get really afraid, and I can be like, why, God? Why? I don't know what you're doing. This is crazy. Now my back goes out? Oh. But God's in control, isn't he?
Amen.
I mean, it's 5 days later, and somehow I'm able to stand up here for what? We're coming up on 30 minutes? And I am going to go lay down after, but don't get me wrong. But you get the point. See, we can forget God when we're tempted. We're tempted we can forget God where he says, flee from evil. Resist the devil. We can forget, but no, it's more fun not to. I don't. We can get a little too big for our britches. The guy did this. I got this promotion. I got blah, blah, blah. And we forget that God says, every good gift is from God. Every good gift is from above. You see where I'm going? See, the beauty is that God will always, always, always take us back. He took Israel back over and over and over again. That's the story of Judges. We see that. We see the love and the grace and mercy of God in spite of themselves, in spite of ourselves, because he sent his son who paid the price so that we do not have to experience the judgment that we deserve from Christ. Christ paid the price for you and I. That's how much he loves us. And the beauty is that we can turn back to him. When we forget God, we can turn back and say, God, I'm sorry. Yeah, I forgot you. I can trust you. Help me, I want to trust. I need your power, I need your presence, I need your help. Please, because I want to do. Right? We can do that only because of the work of Jesus Christ. And when we place our trust and faith in him, done deal. So this week, we will be tempted, I will be tempted, to maybe forget God, to maybe forget that, man, he does love you. He does love me, he loves me. And forget that he does have a plan. He called each and every one of us out to something really good. To be that light of the world, to be that, to be someone, in spite of our junk, that can actually reflect who God is, his love, and his salvation, and his character, and we can forget that. But this week, let's try and remember. Like, okay, I remember a story about a guy named Samson. He forgot some stuff too. And God was gracious. God still used him. He can use me. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we look to your word again, and we're so thankful for what you've done, that you, in spite of it, in spite of Israel's sin, in spite of our sin, you moved the story of salvation to its completion in Christ. That while we were yet sinners, while we were just like Samson, you still chose to die for us, to show us how much you love us, so that we can turn to you and say, God, I remember you once again. That we come back to you and we're forgiven, we come back to you, and we are restored. Thank you for that. Oh, so good news. We love you, Jesus, in your name. Amen.